Welcome one and all to Mail Time, where we tackle the deep questions and issues submitted by you, the listener. But before we get into it, let's talk about what's going on in the world this week. The main thing is that we had two debates in the United States presidential election over the past couple days, and they were doozies because the Iowa caucuses are coming up shortly, which marks the start of the unnecessarily long and protracted process of nominating a candidate for the presidency. This debate solidified in my mind that Donald Trump is going to be the Republican nominee for President of the United States. He brought the knives out this debate, and I think it's clear that he's becoming more and more comfortable on the debate stage as time goes on. But the main exchange from the debate, which got most people talking, is an exchange between Ted Cruz and Donald Trump, in which Ted Cruz tried to paint Donald Trump as not a real conservative, saying something along the lines of he had New York values, and not many conservatives come out of New York. Trump responded by saying, "Hey, I was there at 9/11. 9/11 was bad, and what you said is insulting." And people ate it up. And not just people on the right, but people on the left were talking about what a critical blow this was to Ted Cruz. And Cruz did a horrific job in responding to it. And here's what bothers me. It seems like politicians in the United States use 9/11 as a political deflection tool. It reminded me of that episode of Family Guy, and I'm not a huge Family Guy fan. In fact, it's one of my least favorite shows on television. But every so often, it has its moments. And there's an episode where Lois runs for mayor, and it looks like she's going to lose. However, at the debate, all she keeps saying is 9/11, and 9/11 was bad, and people eat it up, and she ends up winning the election. It's like saying, you know what? I really appreciate your complicated, nuanced political point, but here's my counterpoint. 9/11. And honestly, I'm not a Ted Cruz fan at all, but he does have a point, because Donald Trump is significantly less conservative than some of the other members on that stage. He's managed to create this image that he's super conservative by leaning hard right on very specific issues, mainly immigration. However, on things such as social policy and fiscal policy, Donald Trump is way to the left of just about any of those Republicans. And I think Cruz was justified in at least drawing that to the attention of an audience full of Republicans. On the Democratic side, you had another debate, which was certainly the most feisty debate the Democrats have had this cycle. Hillary Clinton, who has, by the way, used the whole 9/11 deflection trick before, not in this debate though, came out with both barrels loaded and pointed directly at Bernie Sanders. Bernie fought back as best he could, but he's not the kind of politician to get into those kind of personal knockdown, drag-out matchups, which is one of the things I think people find so utterly refreshing about Bernie Sanders. In any case, I think this is a very bad strategy for Clinton to use. That's because the overwhelming majority of Democrats support highly the principles that Bernie Sanders is advocating. So I don't think it's particularly effective for Clinton to go out there and say, yeah, you know what? All those principles you're advocating, Bernie Sanders, they're garbage, total garbage. I don't think that's going to be turning a lot of people on. Anyway though, with the primaries so close to starting, we're probably going to be talking a lot about American politics on this podcast. And for that, I do apologize to people who might not be particularly interested in American politics, to which I say, you people are crazy, because American politics is more akin to some sort of gladiatorial blood sport than it is to political debate. And how can that not be interesting? Speaking of American politics, it's now time for our first submission, and I'm very eager to delve into this submission. This submission comes from Austin, and the subject line is entitled, Why I Support Donald Trump. He writes, Hello Spencer, I should probably start by laying out my point quickly, because I expect to produce a disorganized rant and I don't want it to be too lengthy. I also want to warn you that as a Trump supporter, my use of language, although is not vulgar, it is direct and may not be very PC. I have my argument flying around my head, and I've decided to put it down, so please bear with me. I'll start by saying that I politically identify as a centrist libertarian, more specifically, social libertarian, less government intervention in social issues, economically tamed, antitrust free market, and diplomatically interventionalist. So I don't think I would exactly classify myself as a member of the GOP base, and I have never supported a GOP candidate before, or a Democrat for that matter, but so be it. Donald Trump fits perfectly with almost all my positions that I am unwilling to compromise on. The next president has to support these positions. I believe that is Trump's plan. I am very concerned with corporate tampering in the political system, so the fact that Trump funds himself and is thus not reliant on super PACs or donors is extremely important to me. Trump's success as a businessman and concerned with improving the efficiency of government departments, such as the military, is also very convincing. His realist approach to foreign policy, neither trusting or distrusting Russia, shows that he takes the situation very seriously. He is very genuine and takes on obsessive political correctness in society and is instead in favor of unfettered free speech. His reluctance to bring up issues on homosexuality makes me suspect he doesn't want to upset his GOP voters by proposing a more lenient view on LGBT issues, though he may support it himself. I also find the arguments against Trump to be extremely lacking. Setting aside the distressingly popular, "wow, Trump is such an idiot" position with no reason or rationale behind it, the most critical arguments still fall flat. The argument that he is a racist bigot who hates Muslims and Mexicans and other groups is insufficient, and here is why. First, I will point out that Islam is a religious faith, not a race. Second, I suspect most of his comments are a result of his anti-PC message, and some people are not ready for his direct speech. Third, he has seen and foreseen what is happening in Europe with the Rotterdam child rape ring, Cologne's mass sexual assaults, Sweden's shocking rape rate compared to its neighbors, and attacks in Paris committed by registered militants as a consequence of mass immigration. I'm willing to trust his foresight, considering how spot on he was in the 2003 criticism of the war in Iraq. He pretty much looked 13 years into the future and described what we see today. It is clear that some cultures that many migrants and refugees come from have bad ideas about women, consent, and ages of said consent, and not every immigrant is able or willing to see past that and integrate into Western ideas on those three concepts. They also have extremist factions that preach hatred of the West that have a small and dedicated audience of dangerous supporters. On his Mexican comments, he has expressed extensive support and gratitude towards the people from Mexico that immigrate using supported and legal methods rather than illegally. He did not classify Mexicans as rapists. He declared that the Mexican government was deliberately allowing or even endorsing their known criminals to illegally emigrate to the United States. He clarified himself later when questioned, but some of his detractors ignore that because he looks better when he explains himself, and they are not okay with that. Some of his detractors are being intellectually dishonest because of this. I hope this rant isn't too harsh to Trump detractors. I may disagree with them, but I want to step up to a more reasonable argument because I'm actually a bit disappointed and scared that I have no choice but to agree with Trump in almost every way. I would rather support Bernie Sanders, but I don't think the American economy is ready to pay for college and health care of hundreds of millions. Not yet, at the very least. You are someone who I trust to mount an intellectually stimulating and damaging argument against my support for Trump, given your past work in this podcast. So I want to hear one if you wish to give it. Thank you for reading this long-winded ramble from one of the Trump supporters in your audience. I love the podcast and your other work, and I look forward to learning about the benevolent dictatorship of Marcus Aurelius. Sincerely, Austin from Arizona. So, there's a lot to go over here. I actually sent Austin an email after I received this submission, thanking him for it, because I hadn't actually received any Trump support yet, so it was nice to get a different perspective. And I always appreciate having a multitude of perspectives given voices on this podcast. As well, though, in the email I sent, I expressed one of the things that worries me most about Trump, and that is how any dissenters from his rallies are forcibly removed. Sometimes people who have done nothing at all are forcibly removed. And the way the crowd can get into this frenzied, completely unjustified hatred is very disturbing to me. There are two main examples of this that come up in my mind. One, there was a recent video where a pair of gentlemen came to a Trump rally and held up signs that said, "America is already great." And the people around them started berating them, forcibly grabbing their signs and ripping them up until the whole crowd around them got into this frenzy, and eventually Trump said, "Get him out of here, we gotta kick him out." The next incident was when a Muslim woman came to a Trump rally, and all she did was stand up with a shirt that said, "I come in peace," and had a badge identifying her as a member of the Muslim faith. This is to draw attention to one of Donald Trump's most controversial policies of identifying and cataloging Muslims. This brings up one of my greatest fears if Donald Trump was elected president, is that he wouldn't engage with anyone else besides his own circle of supporters. Anyone else is to be ridiculed and lambasted. Austin wrote me back with 2 points. One is that he believes Trump is largely innocent of this, and 2, people in the past have verbally interrupted Trump rallies, and that Trump rallies are not a Q&A session. To which at first I largely agreed with Austin that Trump was innocent of this kind of dynamic, and it was his supporters that were taking the reins. But as this goes on, more and more it looks like at the very least that Trump staffers are encouraging this type of behavior. And Trump himself said that hopefully once we get security that's so nasty and will kick anybody out, then we won't have any more problems. And the next thing I would say is that yes, if you are being verbally disruptive of a Trump rally, if you're standing up, yelling, screaming, making a scene, then absolutely you are justified in kicking them out. But when you have people holding up signs that say, "America is already great," that's not disrupting the rally. That's not even a bad message. I mean, how dare these people insinuate pride in their country? So what I'm saying is that there's a fine line between dissent and disruption. With that being said, though, I find it a mark of great courage for a politician to engage with those disruptors. One example of this would be several months ago when Bernie Sanders allowed a series of Black Lives Matter protesters to actually come and take the stage and say their piece. Now, Black Lives Matter is a movement I have very mixed feelings on. I think they're drawing attention to an important issue, but doing it in the worst way imaginable. For me, though, it showed a lot of integrity for Bernie to say, "You know what? You got something to say? Come up here and say it." And as someone who believes in letting people speak their minds and speak their opinions, it warmed the cockles of my heart. So that's my first concern about Donald Trump, is that if elected president, he would not engage with his detractors. To use a reference from the podcast, he would not be a Marcus Aurelius. He would be a Stephen Harper. So in that sense, I'm not convinced that Donald Trump would be that much better than the PC people in terms of free speech. As well, another thing I wanted to mention, which I forgot to mention earlier, is one thing that makes me completely disrespect Trump is his insistence on personally insulting his political opponents, such as his insults against John McCain, Megyn Kelly, and of course his infinite insults against Hillary Clinton. That makes it so I could never respect him as a candidate, because I believe politics should be fought in the realm of ideas, not personal insults.